Okay, now for me, a lot of us want to deal with just certain topics that seem like little topics pop up here and there. I was watching Sa Neter's show, and he had something on the Aboriginals community that's actually trying to say that they're not Africans. So if you look like me, then I would suggest that you either started doing some type of research, or either you're going to have to listen to other Africans that may know a little bit more than you know about the topic, such as myself. I've went into genetics, dealing with other topics that we've dealt with to try to find out who I am. It's not necessarily about it's not necessarily about being racist or being what the word they call racist, or trying to miseducate people. I just, this is just a search that I'm looking for myself personally, and it looks like we're all searching for who we are. And I came up with a term that's saying that we're all suffering from historical terrorism. And what I mean by that is, because of the history that they erased, we're confused as to who we are. And that's the first thing that you're going to have to, or any one of us is going to have to acknowledge, that we did have our so-called memories erased. What I mean by that is through not being able to read any type of text or literature for over, from what they say, through documentation of maybe 400 years. That's what we have. For 400 years of not being able to view literary text. That is a damaging. That was done for a purpose. It has to be acknowledged. We have people that don't even want to acknowledge the slave trade. But it's a greatness that comes from the slave trade that a lot of us are not taking into account, and not really appreciating. I know that sounds weird, but via DNA, we would not be the great people we are genetically had it not been for the slave trade. Had we come through the Bering Straits, or what they call the ice bridge that links Russia to let me see if I can pull up a map. That links Russia. I got that ready. The links Russia to Alaska. That's how the people that the what you really the real Aboriginals. That's how they got here. So I want to talk about that. Let me see. Map. World map. I wanna man, what happened? Anyway, I want to let me put up some kind of simple map here, so we can at least see what I'm saying, because I know we are visual people. Want to be able to show actually what I'm saying. That map is too small. Come on. Okay, maybe this is better. Okay, this is good. Okay, once upon a time, this this part right here was connecting with that part over there. If y'all can see the map, this used to connect to Alaska over here. This was all connected via land ice. This is what they say gave the migration, gave the people the ability to migrate into the Americas and populate the Americas. So let me get out of there, because this is not a good map. So okay, let me get out of all of this. Now let me go into the genetic aspect of this. So what we're gonna have to do, we're gonna have to understand genetics. This is about the family, the human family tree, or a family tree. I'm gonna let this play. I don't know how much of this has played. Let me go back. And this is a leading scientist, Savante Pabo. He's a European, but they have did the research on the genome project. That's one of the most studied projects of genetics on the planet. We do have African sources, but I'm for just for sake of just for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and introduce this. This is a 17-minute video, so I'm going to let this play, and then I'm going to hopefully go into another video, and then I'm going to go into what all this means. So let me give y'all let y'all check this out, and then I'll be back after this 17-minute video. So peace.
What I want to talk to you about is what we can learn from studying the genomes of living people and extinct humans. But before doing that, I just briefly want to remind you about what you already know, that our genomes, our genetic material, are stored in almost all cells in our bodies, our chromosomes, in the form of DNA, which is this famous double helical molecule. And the genetic information is contained in the form of the sequence of 4 bases, abbreviated with the letters A, T, C, and G. And the information is there twice, one on each strand, which is important because when new cells are formed, these strands come apart. New strands are synthesized to the old ones as templates in an almost perfect process. But nothing, of course, in nature is totally perfect. So sometimes an error is made and the wrong letter is built in. And we can then see the result of such mutations when we compare DNA sequences among us here in the room, for example. If we compare my genome to a genome of you, approximately every 1,200, 1,300 letters will differ between us. And these mutations accumulate approximately as a function of time. So if we add in a chimpanzee here, we will see more differences. Approximately 1 letter in 100 will differ to a chimpanzee. And if you're then interested in the history of a piece of DNA or the whole genomes, you can reconstruct the history of the DNA with those differences you observe. And generally we depict our ideas about this history in the form of trees like this. In this case, it's very simple. The 2 human DNA sequences go back to a common ancestor quite recently. Further back is there one shared with the chimpanzees. And because these mutations happen approximately as a function of time, you can transform these differences to estimates of time, where the 2 humans typically will share a common ancestor about 500,000 years ago, and with the chimpanzees it will be in the order of 5 million years ago. So what has now happened in the last few years is that there are some technologies around that allow you to see many, many pieces of DNA very quickly. So you can now, in a matter of hours, determine a whole human genome. Each of us, of course, contains 2 human genomes, one from our mothers and one from our fathers. And they are around 3 billion such letters long. And we will find that the 2 genomes in me, 1 genome of mine with one of yours, will have about 3 million differences in order. And what you can then also begin to do is to say, how are these genetic differences distributed across the world? And if you do that, you find a certain amount of genetic variation in Africa. And if you look outside Africa, you actually find less genetic variation. This is surprising, of course, because in the order of 6 to 8 times fewer people live in Africa than outside Africa, yet the people inside Africa have more genetic variation. Moreover, almost all these genetic variants we see outside Africa have closely related DNA sequences that you find inside Africa. But if you look in Africa, there is a component of the genetic variation that have no close relatives outside. So a model to explain this is that a part of the African variation, but not all of it, have gone out and colonized the rest of the world. And together with the methods to date these genetic differences, this has led to the insight that modern humans that are essentially indistinguishable from you and me, evolved in Africa quite recently, between 100 and 200,000 years ago, and later between 150,000 years ago or so, went out of Africa to colonize the rest of the world. So what I often like to say is that from a genomic perspective then, we are all Africans. We either live inside Africa today or in quite recent exile. Another consequence of this recent origin of modern humans is that genetic variants are generally distributed widely in the world, at many places, and they tend to vary as gradients from a bird's eye perspective. And since there are many genetic variants and they have different such gradients, this means that if you determine a DNA sequence, a genome from one individual, we can quite accurately estimate where that person comes from, provided that its parents or grandparents haven't moved around too much. But does this then mean, as many people tend to think, that there are huge genetic differences between groups of people on different continents, for example? Well, we can begin to ask those questions also. There is, for example, a project that's underway to sequence 1,000 individuals, their genomes from different parts of the world. They've sequenced 185 Africans from 2 populations in Africa. They sequenced approximately equally many people in Europe and in China. And we can begin to say how much variance do we find, how many letters that vary in at least one of those individual sequences. And it's a lot, 38 million variable positions. But we can then ask, are there any absolute differences between Africans and non-Africans? Perhaps the biggest difference most of us would imagine existing. With absolute difference, then I mean a difference where people inside Africa at a certain position will all individuals 100% have one letter, and everybody outside Africa has another letter. And the answer to that, among those millions of differences, is that there is not a single such position. This may be surprising, maybe a single individual is misclassified or so we can relax the criteria a bit and say how many positions do we find, and 95% of people in Africa have one variant, 95% another variant, and a number of that as well. So this is very surprising. It means that when we look at people and see a person from Africa and a person from Europe or Asia, we cannot for a single position in the genome with 100% accuracy predict what the person will carry. And only for 12 positions can we hope to be 95% right. This may be surprising because you can of course look at this and quite easily say where they or their ancestors came from. So what this means then is that those traits we then look at and so readily see, facial features, skin color, hair structure, are not determined by single genes with big effects, but are determined by many different genetic variants that simply vary in frequency between different parts of the world. There is another thing with those traits that we so easily observe in each other that I think is worthwhile to consider, and that is that in a very literal sense, they are really on the surface of our bodies. They are what we just said, facial features, hair structure, skin color. There are also a number of features that vary between continents like that have to do with how we metabolize food that we ingest, or that have to do with how our immune system deals with microbes that try to invade our bodies. But so those are all parts of our bodies where we very directly interact with the environment in a direct confrontation, if you like. So it's easy to imagine how particularly those parts of our bodies were quickly influenced by selection from the environment and shifted frequencies of genes that are involved in them. But if we look on other parts of our bodies where we don't directly interact with the environment, our kidneys, our livers, our hearts, there is no way to say by just looking at these organs where in the world they will come from. So there's another interesting thing that comes from this realization that humans have a recent common origin in Africa. And that is that when that humans emerged around 100,000 years ago or so, they were not alone on the planet. There were other forms of humans around, most famously perhaps Neanderthals, these robust forms of humans compared to the left here with a modern human skeleton on the right, that existed in Western Asia and Europe since several hundred thousands of years. So an interesting question is what happened when we met? What happened to the Neanderthals? And to begin to answer such questions, my research group, since over 25 years now, work on methods to extract DNA from remains of Neanderthals and extinct animals that are tens of thousands of years old. So this involves a lot of technical issues in how you extract the DNA, how you convert it to form the CAM sequence. You have to work very carefully to avoid contamination of experiments with DNA from yourself. And this then, in conjunction with these methods that allow very many DNA molecules to be sequenced very rapidly, allowed us last year to present the first version of the Neanderthal genome, so that any one of you can now look on the internet on the Neanderthal genome, or at least on the 55% of it that we've been able to reconstruct so far. And you can begin to compare it to the genomes of people who live today. And one question that you may then want to ask is, what happened when we met? Did we mix or not? And the way to ask that question is to look at the Neanderthal that comes from Southern Europe and compare it to genomes of people who live today. So we then look to do this at pairs of individuals, starting with 2 Africans, looking at the 2 African genomes, finding places where they differ from each other, and in each case ask, what is a Neanderthal like? Does it match one African or the other African? We would expect it to be no difference because Neanderthals were never in Africa. They should be equal, have no reason to be closer to one African than another African. And that's indeed the case. Statistically speaking, there is no difference in how often the Neanderthal matches one African or the other. But this is different if we now look at a European individual and an African, then significantly more often does a Neanderthal match a European rather than an African. The same is true if we look at a Chinese individual versus an African. The Neanderthal will match the Chinese individual more often. This may also be surprising because the Neanderthals were never in China. So the model we've proposed to explain this is that when modern humans came out of Africa sometime after 100,000 years ago, they met Neanderthals. Presumably they did so first in the Middle East, where there were Neanderthals living. If one then mixed with each other there, then those modern humans that became the ancestors of everyone outside Africa carried with them this Neanderthal component in their genome to the rest of the world. So that today then people living outside Africa have about 2.5% of their DNA from Neanderthals. So having now a Neanderthal genome at hand as a reference point and having the technologies to look at ancient remains and extract the DNA, we can begin to apply them elsewhere in the world. And the first place we've done that is in southern Siberia, in the Altai Mountains, at a place called Denisova, a cave site in this mountain here, where archaeologists in 2008 found a tiny little piece of bone. This is a copy of it that they realized came from the last phalanx of a little finger of the pinky of a human. And it was well enough preserved so we could determine the DNA from this individual, even to a greater extent than for the Neanderthals, actually, and start relating it to the Neanderthal genome and to people today. And we found that this individual shared a common origin for his DNA sequences with Neanderthals around 640,000 years ago. And further back, 800,000 years ago, is there a common origin with present-day humans. So this individual comes from a population that shares an origin with Neanderthals, but far back and then have a long independent history. We call this group of humans that we then describe for the first time from this tiny little piece of bone for Denisovans after this place where they were first described. So we can then ask for Denisovans the same things as for the Neanderthals. Did they mix with ancestors of the present-day people? If we ask that question and compare the Denisovan genome to people around the world, we surprisingly find no evidence of Denisovan DNA in any people living even close to Siberia today. But we do find it in Papua New Guinea and in other islands in Melanesia and the Pacific. So this presumably means that these Denisovans have been more widespread in the past, as we don't think that the ancestors of Melanesians were ever in Siberia. So from studying these genomes of extinct humans, we're beginning to arrive at a picture of what the world looked like when modern humans started coming out of Africa. In the West, there were Neanderthals. In the East, there were Denisovans, maybe other forms of humans too that were not yet described. We don't know quite where the border between these people were, but we know that in southern Siberia, there were both Neanderthals and Denisovans, at least sometimes in the past. Then modern humans emerged somewhere in Africa, came out of Africa, presumably in the Middle East. They meet Neanderthals, mix with them, continue to spread over the world, and somewhere in Southeast Asia, they meet Denisovans, mix with them, and continue on out into the Pacific. And then these early forms of humans disappear, but they live on a little bit today in some of us, in that people outside Africa have 2.5% of their DNA from Neanderthals, and people in Melanesia actually have an additional 5% approximately from the Denisovans. Does this then mean that there is, after all, some absolute difference between people outside Africa and inside Africa, in that people outside Africa have this old component in their genome from these extinct forms of humans, whereas Africans do not? But I don't think that is the case. Presumably modern humans emerged somewhere in Africa. They spread across Africa also, of course, and there were older, earlier forms of humans there. And since we mixed elsewhere, I'm pretty sure that one day when we will perhaps have a genome of also these earlier forms in Africa, we will find that they have also mixed with early modern humans in Africa. So to sum up, what have we learned from studying genomes of present-day humans and extinct humans? I've learned perhaps many things, but one thing that I find sort of important to mention is that I think the lesson is that we're always mixed. We're mixed with these earlier forms of humans, wherever we met them, and we're mixed with each other ever since. Thank you for your attention.
So there you have it, family. So that's Svante Pääbo, and that's him at a conference amongst the leading scientists of the world on the Genome Project. What he's explaining is that they have found the Neanderthal genetic marker that proves that anybody that's that comes outside of Africa has Neanderthal 2.5% of their DNA comes from a Neanderthal. So how do we recognize this particular genetic marker? How do we know? I mean, how could we know or recognize it? And it's so simplistic and it's so simple. And it's crazy that we are arguing about this, because the simple answer is hair follicles. Now, what I want y'all to listen to very carefully, family, is anyone inside of Africa has a unique hair follicle that no one outside of Africa has. So if you have the curly, kinky hair that you're so ashamed of, that we have been taught to be ashamed of, that is an indication that you come from within inside of Africa, because you have no Neanderthal DNA. So how do we recognize Neanderthal DNA? It's by the stringy hair that everyone has when you look at the humans of today that comes outside of Africa. Well, as soon as you leave where they built what is that the Suez Canal, where they cut that Suez Canal at, from the Iranians to the Arabs, everyone has the admixed hair of non-Africans, meaning Denisovans, and Neanderthals. So this is the simplistic way that you can tell that we were brought over here. Now what you want to do is you want to look at this map, and I'm gonna bring this map out, because see, this is a map that shows you, this is how we come out of Africa. This is that little thing that I was talking about, where they have the Suez Canal. They've cut that, but it used to be all one landmass. So when the Homo sapiens sapien is born here within Africa. But this is not to say that other Africans migrated out of here and so-called mutated into these other species of the Denisovans and Neanderthal. But this happened over millions of years, which the chart over here shows you how this happened. So this shows you Africans 2 million years ago, just straight Africans. 1 million years ago, straight Africans. Then you get the Homo heidelbergensis genus, and then this right here is when the first time that we leave out of Africa. This is the first migration. This is the red line. This line right here shows when we left out of Africa the first time. So the Homo heidelbergensis or heidelbergensis birthed the Neanderthal and the Denisovan. So they are birthed outside of Africa. That makes them non-African. So I'm not saying that these particular people are African. Yes, they were birthed in Africa, but they developed outside of Africa, which makes them a different species. So over time, they develop into these particular species. Then you see the orange line is where we come out of Africa again, and then the admixture comes. That's when we mix with the Neanderthal and the Denisovans to make modern human today. I know that kind of sounds weird and it can maybe be confusing to some people, but I really think that that's really the simplest way that anybody can explain this. So what I'm saying again is that the hair follicles of all non-Africans starting right here, and you can even look to the people of today, and you will see that the hair follicles of the Ethiopians even, and they're still considered African, but their hair texture is different from anybody else on this continent. You have light-skinned Africans all the way down here because the sun doesn't shine. So that's why you got light-skinned Africans all the way down here with zero admixture. They're called the Khoisan people. You can look them up. I may even pull up a picture. Matter of fact, let me do that because I know we like to see visuals. Hope I don't butcher this. Oh, shit. Oh, there they are. I think that's it. And let me show y'all an image of them. So we come in all different shades, family. These are what we would call and consider in America. Well, let me get back to this. We would consider this light skin. You know what I mean? And then you can see that they have like just some Japanese looking features, but these people are the oldest people on the planet. They have some of the oldest DNA on the planet. You can look them up. They're in the Nairobi, South Africa region, but they're called the Khoisan. And this is how you spell it: Khoisan. They call the San people. But they are some beautiful people, and they have some of the oldest genetics on the planet Earth. And this is actually where you will find some of the oldest in the same region where you'll find some of the oldest bones at and stuff like that. See, this is maybe showing you like the different regions of people, which is a beautiful map. See, because this is a very old map, and this will show you the languages that are spoken, and it's broken down. That breaks down the people, but this tells you like the history. The Khoisan language family is the smallest of the language families of Africa. The name Khoisan derives from the name of the I can't pronounce that, people or real people group of South Africans and the San Bushman group of in Namibia. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Khoisan people appeared in South Africa 60,000 years ago, making the Khoisan language amongst the most ancient of all humans. So even you try to denounce Africa, but language is developed in Africa. You would not even be speaking had it not been for our people developing a language to speak. So the Khoisan, who were once called Hottentots by Europeans, the term now considered derogatory means stuttered in Dutch. However, the Dutch used the word, whatever that is, stutterer, to more specifically describe the clicking sound used in the Khoisan's language. The word lives on, however, in the names of several African animals and plant species, such as the hot fig and the carpidius, or whatever that is. But this is what I really want to click on this map, because this is how the Nile Sahara. Where is that at? That's that blue. This is all this dark blue. These are these people from the Nile. This is where the Nile starts at. And then what are they calling this? Asiatic or whatever. I don't know what they mean by that. But see, but I think that's because this admixture going on up here. So this must be something kind of. But the Khoisan down here, this is what I was talking about. They're more ancient. They got more ancient DNA than most Africans on the continent. But anyway, so let me get back to a couple of videos and I'm gonna end this. So hopefully I didn't ramble on too long, but I don't like the fact that we want to continue on denouncing African DNA when that's the source of let me show you this migrational map. And this is I think this is just visual to show you how the migration took place. Where human life starts, right there, 200. That's where they found the oldest fossils at Lucy. And then we spread out and populate within our own continent 70,000 years ago. So this is how you see we migrated on the southern plain. So when you see the Aboriginals, the original Aboriginals of Australia, they're 50,000 years ago. No Europeans on the map yet. Then we going up into Asia, populating them. So these people are becoming their own people now. This is millions of years and thousands of years of evolution. Now they fixing to go into Europe. 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthal is born. So now they're talking about the glacier, the ice bridge. And people, so the admixed people, they see it's a piece missing because of that second out of Africa where they mix and then they get the human DNA, and that's how they populate the rest of the world. So this is it's a little information mixing in here, but they're showing you how people came over here. Then so all of these people, when you coming out, let me go back, because I want to explain. When you coming right out of here, where is it at? See this right here, this map right here. Let me stop it when they get ready to pop out. See, this is what they're saying on this map. They're saying that the first time we came out through here, which I wouldn't disagree with, because this is the first migration. They're saying that these people are older. So I would agree that the Australians, the Indians, the Arabs, they're our first offspring that popped up out of Africa. You know what I'm saying? And then the next time, and then they go ahead, they come back around, and then they created the Denisovans. I mean, the Denisovans. So I guess this is the Denisovans' first migration, and then the second migration will be the migration of the Neanderthal, or would that be the Homo sapiens sapiens? But this map right here doesn't do it justice. But I want to show one more video that this brother did, and I think this is gonna be it. But this brother broke this down perfectly, and I think it's really, after this, is really nothing else that I can say, because he's gonna back up exactly what I'm saying or what I'm trying to say here. So y'all watch this video, and then I'm gonna close this video out. Peace.
It seems every so often there's a movement in the Black community with the sole purpose to disassociate Black people, primarily African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, and Afro-Latinos, from Africa. In 2014, I came up close and personal with a few different sects of Hebrew Israelites. Many of these brothers were preaching that Black people in the Americas, both North and South, were not African, but instead Hebrew Israelites. I found this very confusing based on my own studies and research, as well as basic common sense. I have since met different sects of Israelites who, although they believe in and practice the Hebrew Israelite doctrine, they also acknowledge that they are indeed of African descent, and Africa is their motherland. But this video isn't about the Israelites. I do have a video about them, which I'll place in the description for you to watch afterwards. Around this time last year, I started getting a lot of brothers and sisters telling me, Angel, we're not Africans or of African descent. We're native to this land. We're aboriginals. We're indigenous to the Americas. We were here first. And we didn't come from Africa. We weren't enslaved and kidnapped in Africa. It was all done here. At first, I kind of ignored it. I've read and studied on this quite in depth and noticed that a lot of the information being spouted is just being misinterpreted or simply speculation and assumptions. There's no actual evidence to truly back these statements to the point that they become unquestionable as tangible evidence. I've even heard brothers and sisters talk about Malcolm X referring to himself as Aboriginal. Although he did, he was using the word Aboriginal as a synonym for Black. But after so many people kept approaching me with these questions, I decided to do further research. And this is what this video is about. I remember being a teenager and reading a few books by Ivan Van Sertima. They came before Columbus, African Presence in Early Europe, and Early America Revisited. Ivan Van Sertima teaches, based on his studies, that African explorers traveled and migrated across the globe before the Europeans, Arabs, or Asians. Ivan Van Sertima challenged and set the record straight regarding the myth that Christopher Columbus discovered America. But before I get into that, some people believe that Black people were in the Americas before anyone else and are the true first inhabitants. But the question has to be, how did they get here and where did they come from? We're aware that human life started in Africa. Black people migrated out of Africa as Homo sapiens thousands of years after the Neanderthals, who left Africa prior. However, the point where the out of Africa theory becomes incorrect is the theory that Black Africans lost melanin and their features changed based on climate and food as they discovered new lands, implying that white people are merely albino Africans. We know this to be false, because Caucasians were created by Homo sapiens breeding with Neanderthals in the Caucasus regions outside of Africa, thus creating a hybrid which would eventually be known as the European, the Caucasian, the white man. Asians and Australasians were created in a similar way, but with the introduction of Denisovan DNA, as well as some Neanderthal DNA. If you want more details on the out of Africa theory and the creation of Caucasians, there's also a video in the description called How the Caucasian Race Was Created. So check it out. So long story short, based on common sense, anthropology, and history, if Black people were in Americas first, then of course, the Native Americans had to have traveled from Africa, which is taught by many scholars. Therefore, if you believe that you are a Native American or an Aboriginal American, aka a Black American, then you are in fact African because you came from Africa. Seems so simple and basic, right? But there are some people that don't believe in the out of Africa theory at all, not one iota. And they believe we didn't migrate from Africa to the Americas, but instead, we were already here. This is highly incorrect, as there is no evidence to corroborate this. All Black life definitely started in Africa. We were the first humans, and we created all varying degrees of mankind. We traveled the globe first and inhabited many places. For example, you have Papua New Guineans who look just like African people or Black people, same features, same type of woolly hair, but they're indigenous to Papua New Guinea. And they're not African, right? Wrong. They also migrated out of Africa thousands of years ago. Now let's discuss the Native Americans as the commonly depicted Native Americans throughout history, the ones with red skin, being in the Americas as the first inhabitants and how they got to the Americas. Anthropology states that two main groups of what we now call the Native Americans traveled out of Asia 23,000 years ago. They believe the groups splintered off from an East Asian population. The group from Northeast Asia crossed the Bering Land Bridge, known as the Bering Strait, between Northeast Asia and Alaska, eventually making their way to the rest of the Americas. They also state that 10,000 years later, or about 13,000 years ago, Native Americans started to split into different groups, creating different tribes across North and South America. However, anthropologists divided the migration groups into two. One is the first Americans, being Northeast Asian, and another they identify as Population Y, which carried ancestry more closely related to indigenous Australians. That's your Aboriginals with dark skin and straight to wavy hair from Australia. This explains why some Native Americans are shown in images with very dark skin and straight hair. These are descendants of the Australian Aboriginals. These Aboriginals would have also been victims of slavery. So if you believe that you are an American Aboriginal or descendant, you're implying that you are a descendant of the Australian Aboriginals who migrated into the Americas along with the Northeast Asians, who had straight or wavy loose curled hair. So I have to ask you, if you're an Aboriginal of America, why is your hair Afro-textured? As you'll all agree, you may have seen images of dark-skinned Native Americans and also Australian Aboriginals, but their hair has never been Afro-textured. Native Americans today can trace their ancestry to Eurasian migrants with Australasian ancestry, which adds tangible evidence and proof to the research and studies. So this would of course mean that there would have been darker-skinned Native Americans as well as lighter-skinned Native Americans based on these two groups. What I will say, if you believe you are an Aboriginal of the Americas, take a DNA test. It will show if you have Australasian or Eurasian ancestry, as well as Native American ancestry. And if it comes back instead with countries from Africa, well, self-hate is a hell of a drug, but self-love is an incredible cure. Also, the oldest bones and artifacts correlate with this information. Now, how do African people or Black people fit into this migration? Are the so-called African Americans descendants of the dark-skinned, straight-haired Australian Aboriginals? No. The hair alone will tell you different. As I stated, Australian Aboriginals were created by Homo sapien and Denisovan DNA, as well as some Neanderthal DNA, hence why they look different to the Black Papua New Guineans, who still look like African people. The teachings that Africans came before Columbus was not based on mass migration of huge numbers of African people to the Americas before these Eurasians and Australasian peoples. It was after this migration, but before Columbus discovered the Americas and the natives. Now I say discover, but he didn't discover America. Firstly, you can't discover a people in a continent that was already here, had their own culture and civilization. There's overwhelming evidence that proves that African people regularly sailed across the Atlantic to the Americas, thousands of years before Columbus. Ancient civilizations from Egypt and West African countries traveled to the Americas, teaching the natives how to build a civilization. They brought with them the art of pyramid building, political systems, and religious practices, as well as mathematics, writing, and a sophisticated calendar. And if you don't believe me, well, maybe you'll believe a white man. Christopher Columbus himself wrote in his journal, Black-skinned people had come from the southeast in boats, trading in gold-tipped spears. This was documented in 1920 by renowned American historian and linguist Leo Weiner of Harvard University in his book, Africa and the Discovery of America. One of the first documented instances of Africans sailing and settling in the Americas were Black Egyptians led by King Ramses III during the 19th dynasty in 1292 BC. In 1311 AD, another major wave of African exploration to the New World was led by King Abu Bakari II, the ruler of the 14th century Mali Empire, which was larger than the Roman Empire. The king sent out 200 ships of men and 200 ships of trade material, crops, animals, cloth, and African knowledge of astronomy, religion, and art. Travel in the seas and oceans was not a European invention, but in fact was started by the African people. In the early 1940s, archaeologists uncovered a civilization known as the Olmecs of 1200 BC, which predated any other advanced civilization in the Americas. The Olmec civilization, which was of African origin and dominated by Africans. This was the first significant civilization in the Americas. Olmecs are known for the giant carved heads found in central Mexico that have unmistakable African Negroid features. Historian Professor Ivan van Sertima explains how Olmecs were the first Mesoamerican civilization to use a written language, sophisticated astronomy, arts, and mathematics, and they built the first cities in Mexico, all of which greatly influenced the Mayans and other Native American civilizations. Africans played an integral role in the Olmec Empire's rise. And that African influence was happening during the same period as the ancient Black Egyptian civilization. Need more evidence? Easy. They found narcotics, cocaine, and nicotine native to America inside ancient Egyptian mummies. These substances are only derived from American plants. This could only happen by trade between Africa and America. Need more? They found statues of animals like lions, elephants, and gorillas, which are not found in the Americas, but in Africa in Native American civilization. The Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas all worship Black gods. They have paintings and surviving artwork that show dark-skinned gods with Negro features with woolly hair. But one of the major things is American pyramids. Pyramid construction is highly specialized. Ancient Egyptians started out with the step pyramids and eventually progressed to the smooth pyramids you see in Giza. But in La Venta, Mexico, the Olmecs made a fully finished pyramid. The Olmecian and Egyptian periods were both placed on the same north-south axis and had the same construction methods. Both the pyramids in America and Africa served the same dual purpose: tombs and temples. What I'm telling you is only a tiny fraction of the similarities. The Olmecs created and carved the heads of the African explorers who came from Africa and taught them about religion, mathematics, astronomy, civilization, and so much more, to forever praise them and show gratitude for the gifts Africa gave to the Americas. Clearly, Africans helped civilize America way before Europeans even knew America existed, and way before Europeans claimed to have civilized Africa. So now you know the African people definitely discovered the Americas before the Europeans. You know they civilized the Native Americans. You know there was 2 waves of Native American migrations: people from Northeast Asia, the lighter skin group, and Australasian Aborigines, the darker skin group. Even if you believe your ancestors were already here before anyone else, you still had to come from Africa. They still had to migrate from Africa. Therefore, you're African. But take a DNA test and see for yourself. Africa built the world. Don't be ashamed of being a descendant of Africa. There will be 2 videos in my description, one about Hebrew Israelites and one about how the Caucasian race was created. Like I said, check it out. Don't be fooled by misinformation and propaganda. We are African. Peace, love, and coconut oil.
Make sure you follow me on Instagram and Twitter at angel_IKYG. If you like the video, make sure to share and definitely don't forget to subscribe. Click that bell so that you always get notifications whenever I post a video and you never miss an update. While you're there, make sure to subscribe to my backup page. Also, check out my website, www.ikyg.com. Check out any projects that I might have going on, coaching sessions, Angel's Thoughts, Angel's videos, any events that might be happening. Make sure to utilize the Black Money section of the website. Advertise your business absolutely free to people that look like you, free forever. And also, check out the shop part of the site for any IKYG clothing. If you don't see clothing in your size, don't worry. Just contact us via the site and we'll arrange it just for you. And as always, all the links will be in the description. Peace, love, and coconut water.
It seems every
so there you have it.
it.
I think that brother did an excellent job with visuals to break down that the hair follicles is a dead giveaway that you African. If you have African hair, you African. That's just all it is to it. So with that being said, man, I don't even think that I should even carry on with any more of this. I think that brother, if you don't get it after that, you never will. With that said, I'm fixing to end this. Let me before I do, let me go back and stop sharing my screen. I'm tripping. Yeah, but I'm ending this right now. Like I said, I'll be back probably later on with a little bit more information as far as like videos or something. But until then, peace and Black Power.